Alrighty, welcome to the May meeting of the Burlington Board of Electric Commissioners. We meet every second Wednesday of the month, right here at 585 Pine Street at 5 o'clock. As always, the public is welcome to come on down and join the conversation. Let us know your thoughts and feelings and issues, whatever. Come on down, join the conversation. Second Wednesday of the month, right here at 585 Pine. So we'll get going. We'll start with the agenda. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda? I have one, and that's going to be an executive session at the end of the meeting to discuss personnel issues. Other than that, are there any other changes? None? Okay, great. We'll move on to item number 2, and that's the minutes of the April 10th, 2024 meeting. Barring any, if there are any substantial changes, would love to hear about them now, but if they're just simply typographical or whatever, that can be forwarded directly to the clerk. Do we have any changes or do we have any amendments or anything to the minutes of April 10th?
No.
Alrighty, hearing none, I'll take a motion.
Make the motion to approve the minutes of April 10th, 2024 meeting.
Great, we have a motion, do we have a second?
I second.
Motion and seconded, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, minutes passed for April 10th. Item number 3 on our agenda is public forum. That's a chance for y'all out there to, and in the room to have a conversation, or at least bring up your concerns to the board. And is there anyone here that would like to use the time for public forum? We have someone in the room. Come on, step up, Steve.
Thank you. I mean, we all realize it's not really a conversation. I've got
No,
some of items. My hope is that these things seem to be germane to other things on your agenda tonight, and I hope that the superintendent will address them, and if not, one of you would ask him to address them. So these don't take long. I was just looking through some old stuff the other day, and I noticed it was a press release from March of 2022. The mayor and the superintendent announced that the district energy system was ready to go to Act 250 for permitting. We're now, 17, 18 months away from that. I heard a little bit about this during the discussion of the UVM steam pipe, that this was also an urgent matter, had to go forward. The steam pipe is our biggest thing we can be doing, I think, in the non-residential area as far as dealing with fossil fuels. I noticed when the superintendent gave his update on climate action to the council recently, there was no mention of the steam pipe. So I'm just wondering what's happening with this. Like, we haven't heard anything about it. Is it going forward? Is it not going forward? Or is the city waiting for something to happen with legislation that might exempt the need for permitting? So maybe during the discussion tonight, just wouldn't take long to answer those questions. Number 2 would be, you've got a rate increase on your agenda for tonight, and I'm just wondering how much of that increase is related to the operations of McNeil? Is it, and how much is, well, you'll probably tell us what isn't related to it, but I'd be curious to know how much is related to the operations of McNeil. And then third, there's a resolution, maybe you've read it, maybe you haven't. There was a resolution from the city council at the time the steam pipe was on the agenda back in December of last year. It's a 7-page resolution. It's pretty wordy, and it's got a lot of different moving parts in it. But some of the parts involve studies, working groups, and evaluations of the McNeil plant, and they're supposed to be funded in 2025. So tonight you're talking about the budget. I'm hoping you'll see that those things are in there, and that the working group, or whatever they're calling it in here, that's supposed to be pulled together, is also funded. I think it's pretty important stuff, and I think this is the time to do it. But if you don't get it in the budget now, then it's going to have to be amended in, or who knows what. But it should be something you should see tonight in there. I think they've probably been working on it. If they haven't, then this is a wake-up call. If they have, it'd be nice to see where that's funded. And there's some deadlines even in, I think, November of this year for something like approval of this report. So it's got to be happening now. In fact, it should be probably in the RFP process right now, at least drafting an RFP. So maybe in the discussion tonight, you get the public some information about that. And I may not stick around. I may go home, as they say on VPR, and take the answers off the air. So if I leave, it's not that disrespect. I'm just going to go home. But I think I'm going to stay a little bit because you're going to, at least some of these things could be discussed in the next 1 or 2 items. So thank you very much.
Oh, wait.
Thank you, Steve. Go
I
ahead.
just have a couple clarifying questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, in the first one, it was district energy, you talked about the superintendent, that's the superintendent of the Burlington
Yes.
schools? Okay.
Schools, no. I think
No,
he's
no,
talking about
no, no.
Darren.
Oh, you're talking about Darren?
Darren, of
Okay,
course.
Okay, I didn't, I've never heard him called the superintendent, so that's why I didn't know who you were talking about.
That's okay.
All right,
I always
and
think
then, in the third one, the resolution, you called it the steam pipe, but I'm assuming you're still referring to district energy.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's its nickname.
I'm also going to call out, you mentioned something about fossil fuels, and we don't use fossil fuels. Or we don't.
You have plans to reduce or eliminate fossil fuels. You don't get rid of carbon generating fuels, though, and that's, I think, where the issue is. This resolution gets into that a little bit. The resolution that was passed regarding the so-called steam pipe that BED should be looking at, how to reduce its carbon footprint, not its fossil fuel footprint at the plant over 5 and 10-year periods. And it's a lot of stuff. It's wordy, and I'm not going to read it. You probably have read some of it. If not, it's worth refreshing your memories of what's in here. But there are deadlines for funding and for reporting and for starting to have the public discussion of these issues in 2025. So it should be in the budget. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for your time, Steve. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to speak at this time? Sir?
Oh, good. I'm sorry, I'm filling out the form right now. Hi. My name's Jacob Flanagan. I'm not speaking about any agenda item on, just wanted to catch up with you guys and have a couple of recommendations, thoughts I've been having. There's 3 of them, 2 about the online portal. It's really awesome to have this online portal. I'm hoping we can upgrade it a little bit, though, to bring it up to current standards. Have some ideas about the user interface, just being able to have the user adjust timing and what data is present to make it a little more useful. Right now, it's a great way to look at historical usage, but it's really difficult to use it as a troubleshooting or understanding what your usage is if you're looking at your house. Tying to that also is how quickly data comes in. Right now, and it's somewhat variable as well. Right now, it comes in maybe half a day to like 4 days after the fact, which again is fine for historical usage, but is really difficult if you're trying to analyze your data on the fly and try to understand what's going on with your house. So those are the 2 things on the portal I was thinking about, and if there's any interest in working with that, I would love to help out and come up with ideas and what might be helpful there. The third thing is, so recently I just converted my house to all electric. I got rid of my gas, and I've been, I did a presentation at our local MPA to help people figure out what they can do as well. And what's really awesome is the Burlington rebate website and all the different rebates. And one thing I was thinking that would be great to add to that list is smart panels and switches, because a thing that I feel like a lot of people get tripped up on is thinking they have to upgrade their service and that extra cost. But there's actually a lot of great ways to electrify part or a lot of your house through these smart technologies. And I feel like that could be a really great way to help instigate more of these conversions. And also thinking about BED and making sure that electrifying doesn't balloon our demand. Can we incentivize these smart devices in people's home to kind of mitigate our demand spikes from all this extra electrification? So those are the 3 things I wanted to bring up to you guys. I know that probably kind of random for today, but again, if anybody wants to talk about this further, I'd love to work on these kinds of things. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. We like random things. Keeps us on our toes, keeps us thinking. Is there anybody else that would like to speak at public forum? Is there anybody online? Katie, do we have anybody online?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Good,
Yeah, my name is Ashley Adams. Can you hear me okay?
Ken.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a Burlington resident, and I spoke a couple of meetings ago about the really unacceptable impact that the McNeil plant has on the environment. And, you know, although Burlington Electric denies the fundamental laws of physics, you can simply go to the EPA website and see how much greenhouse gas pollution comes out of the stack every year. I'm sure you're all aware of that. Biomass plants are shutting down around the region for environmental reasons and because they're too expensive to run. And it's my firm belief that McNeil needs to follow suit. Burlington Electric's own integrated resource plan, which this body is tasked with assisting to develop, states that there are cheaper ways for us to get electricity. And, you know, it's public knowledge at this point that the plant is losing money. It's a money-losing operation and will be for the foreseeable future. So I would like to know why the Electric Commission feels Burlington ratepayers should continue to prop up this plant. You know, I see rate increases for FY22, FY23, FY24, FY25, and I just find that outrageous. Burlington Electric is not investor-owned. This is our utility. And allowing the continued operation of the McNeil plant, which is the most polluting and expensive way to generate electricity. And it's just, frankly, an affront to Burlington ratepayers. So I'm wondering if you can just help me understand why the Electric Commission is not calling for the McNeil plant to shut down. And I understand this is not a conversation. I'm interested in your answers, though. And as a previous speaker said, I will take that offline. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Ashley. Are there any other public comment? Hearing none, I'll move on to, thank you everyone for your comments. We appreciate that. We do take that very seriously and to heart. On to the next item of our agenda. Item number 4 is the Commissioner's Corner. Do commissioners have anything that they have that's on their minds between last month and today?
I do not.
Great. All right, that takes us to item number 5. Would that be the General Manager update with General Manager Springer?
All right. Thank you very much. I will, just in the spirit of being collaborative, I'll try to respond to some of the comments that were made.
Fantastic.
I understand it's not a back and forth and it's not technically an agenda item. So the first item, remind me that Mr. Goodkind brought up district energy. So district energy as a project is engineered and designed. Went to the City Council for approval, obviously November of 2023. And subsequent to that time, there have been discussions between the Burlington District Energy nonprofit that is set up to operate the potential facility and the medical center as a potential customer about contractual negotiations. And that's where this project sits at the moment. And if there's, next step, it would be to go to Act 250 as was outlined in that press release. But we're not at that point just yet. So that's where that project is. I think you mentioned, and possibly another commenter mentioned, rate increases. Obviously, Emily's going to go into, and I'll join in on a more detailed presentation about the drivers of rate change. But the drivers of rate change in fiscal year 25 are not the McNeil plant. They're going to be other things like inflation, like transmission costs, which we pay for being connected to the regional grid. And I think we have to be holistic in the way that we look at our facilities' economic value. If we were to judge our other renewable resources like wind, solar, and hydropower the way that some are judging McNeil, you could make an argument that every single renewable resource that we have doesn't, quote, make money relative to the market, relative to cheap fossil fuels that you might be able to buy on the market. But this community, this commission, has said, and frankly the state is about to say, in the updated renewable energy standard, we don't want those fossil fuels. And we've said as well, we don't want nuclear power. So that leaves us with renewable power options. And we've done our very best as a public utility to manage integration of all different types of renewable resources into our portfolio at as low a cost as possible. And this is really a long-term strategy from the state of Vermont. We've said as a state, we want long-term renewable contracts that are stably priced. And there are going to be times when they are in the market relative to other resources. There will be times when they're out of the market. A couple years ago, when we saw a spike in natural gas costs, due in part to the war that was taking place in Ukraine, the McNeil plant generated approximately $7.5 million of revenue above its expenses, if you want to judge it that way. We know that in some years it's going to do that, some years it's going to do something else. It has a lot of value to Burlington that's separate from those different types of evaluations. We are able to avoid several costly state procurement processes because we're 100% renewable and because of McNeil in part. We also get value from having a generation facility that's located close to load. So we get a transmission value from that we would otherwise be paying more for transmission based on the need to import more power. And there's a variety of other economic benefits. So I would just urge that if we're going to take that lens on McNeil, we should take that lens on every renewable resource, in which case solar, wind, and hydro will also be uneconomic, and we would have to kind of look at it that way. We've obviously, as a community, looked at it differently. In terms of the budget and the district energy resolution, as you'll see in the slides this evening, we have a slide specifically on the district energy resolution. The first deadline within that resolution was to issue an RFI for a wood chip dryer by March of 2024. Our team issued it in December of 2023. We've received responses to that RFI. We are in the process of getting all the updated information we can from potential vendors, and we have put money in the FY25 budget for a potential procurement of a wood chip dryer. That's pending approval by the joint owners, by the city council, and potential RFP or additional procurement processes. So we were ahead of schedule on that item. The other items referenced, including studies related to forestry and studies sort of on the future of McNeil, we have budget items in the budget for those. We can't advance any sort of RFP prior to those items being approved in the budget. So you'll see that we've planned for and budgeted for those items, but we can't advance them until the budget advances and we're in the next fiscal year. But our team has kept diligent track of the items in the district energy resolution, plan to be as timely as is at all possible in meeting all of those items. And then I think the other, can't recall, there were some other items that were referenced during public comment. Appreciate Mr. Flanagan's comments on the energy portal. We'll take note of that. We have a new portal, relatively new portal, so there may be some opportunities to look at interesting improvements there. Appreciated his comments on the need for smart demand response and control. We advanced at City Council just on Monday the heat pump bill credit program, which the Commission had previously recommended, which would do some of that type of work, would help customers install smart devices for heat pumps so we can moderate peak demand. So I think we're very much in line with that. There, we also have an item for our EV tariff update tonight that's going to help with our on-street neighborhood parking chargers, pole-mounted chargers, advanced kind of a demand-related rate or peak-related rate for those as well. So I think we're well in line with some of that. And then in terms of, just we hear a lot about McNeil and emissions, and I do want to put it in perspective that it's important we remember that McNeil, we are a 50% owner of that plant. So half of whatever the environmental footprint of that plant is attributable to Burlington Electric, half to the joint owners. If you were to take the CO2 emissions at the stack, which again, I don't think is representative of the necessary kind of holistic life cycle value for the plant, because you're ignoring any and all benefits from sustainable forestry. But if we even just put those aside for a moment, and you took the 2023 CO2 emissions at the stack for McNeil, it was 326,000 tons. If you cut that in half, 163,000 tons attributable to Burlington Electric. If you convert that to metric tons, it's approximately 147,000 metric tons at the stack. If you look at the state's latest emissions inventory projection for 2025, they project that the state is going to have 8.55 million metric tons of emissions overall in 2025. So when we talk about McNeil, even if you want to disregard every benefit that there possibly could be from sustainable forestry, we are talking about approximately 1.7% of the state's projected emissions in 2025 attributable to Burlington. And it's not that we don't want to make efforts to improve the footprint of the plant. We very much do. We committed to those as part of the resolution that was referenced by Mr. Goodkind. If we do a wood chip dryer, if we do district energy, if we do other things, we can improve that footprint even further. And again, I don't know that that stack emissions is necessarily the value you want to focus on, but even with that, it's important to have that perspective. The Net Zero Energy Roadmap is tackling the thermal and ground transportation sectors. Those represent 70 to 75% of Vermont's emissions of that 8.55 million metric tons. So the context there is really important. We talk a lot about McNeil. We talk a lot in some cases about the airport. Jet fuel is 0.06 million metric tons of emissions in the Vermont emissions inventory. And again, it's not that we shouldn't do things to reduce aviation emissions. We should, but it's important that we keep track of the two biggest sectors and the efforts that we're making there to reduce emissions, because those are going to have the biggest dividend in terms of emissions reduction in Vermont and in Burlington. So I offer that all as just hopefully helpful context to provide. Appreciate public comment, appreciate the interest in these topics, and we do look forward to working on the items in the district energy resolution, and we'll have more on that in the budget presentation. Okay, so that said, I think I remembered everything that everybody said. Let me just...
I actually have a question for you.
Oh, yeah, please.
One of the questions from Mr. Goodkind was about not just the studies, but working groups and evaluations. Are they also contingent on the FY25 budget?
No, so we don't, so there's a couple, let me just outline briefly the pieces that were laid out beyond the wood chip dryer, which I've mentioned. There is a request and a requirement for me as the general manager to offer analysis on several items in November of this year, which I plan on doing with support from our team. There is a third-party study that's contemplated looking at confirming the forestry aspects of McNeil's operations. We have that in the budget. That would be an RFP process that we would run. There would be a third party that would be selected to do that work. There is also a process that involves this commission, BED, the IBEW, the Transportation Energy Utilities Committee of the City Council, a number of other named stakeholders, that includes third-party analysis, which again we have resource for in the budget, and includes the TUC convening meetings on its initiative with various folks. So our budget supports the analyses. We don't have resources specifically aimed at supporting the convenings, nor am I aware that we need to, given that the TUC is charged with doing that, and I know the TUC has discussed at its initial meeting for this new council, making sure that they have that on their radar, that they're going to hold meetings later in the year on this topic.
Thank you.
So they'll manage the studies, but BED will pay for them?
That's the way they set it up.
Okay.
Now,
Who selects the vendor? They do, or we do?
well, so it was set up to be a consultative process to some extent between the commission and the Transportation Energy Utilities Committee, and I believe there are a number of named entities within the resolution that included, environmental groups, IBEW, BED, a number of different entities that may be involved in the process, but I believe for the RFP process, it's going to be managed by the TUC in consultation with the commission and with support from BED, if I'm remembering it correctly. Okay, so in terms of the items on my list here, budget and rates, obviously we're going to dig into those this evening. I think it's really important that we understand that there are drivers that are outside of our control, and we'll get into those related to the rates. We are trying very hard to keep them as reasonable as possible, but not go multiple years without making a change and then having a big spike. We're trying to keep predictability and keep changes in the certainly in the single digits and in the low to mid single digits, which we've been able to do. Originally, this had a range of 5.5% to 6.5% for a rate change. As you'll see this evening, we're keeping it at the 5.5% level, so we've at least come in at the low end of the range that we had projected. I want to thank the team that's worked incredibly hard on the budget. We've made a number of cuts in the operating budget from the initial draft to try to hold our controllable costs in the operating budget not only level with FY24, but actually slightly lower than FY24, so we'll get into that. We are presenting this evening and then presenting at the Board of Finance on May 13th. So that's our next step in the budget process. I did mention the heat pump bill credit program was approved unanimously at City Council on Monday. That'll go to the PUC next for approval. We also have a grant that's associated with that program that our team is negotiating a scope with the Department of Energy, and then that grant acceptance will come to the City Council to complete our opportunity for that program. The goal would be ideally that we could roll this out towards the late summer and start getting customers signed up who have heat pumps with these devices to be able to help reduce peak use and learn from the pilot heading into the winter season. We have a number of items I just listed here that are coming to you or have come to you, and a number of which are going to the Council and the Board of Finance on the 3rd of June. The line of credit extension, which there is a bill, H-881, which is pending in the legislature. It's passed the House. They had a hearing already in the Senate. Emily has testified in both bodies on this, and it's pending. I think it was on the notice calendar on the Senate floor today. So we're hopeful it'll be able to be enacted this year. It needs to pass the Senate and be signed by the governor. That would give us access to the charter change approved $10 million level for line of credit instead of $5 million. We have an RFP out that covers both levels for vendors, and we're planning to bring that line of credit extension, which we do every 2 years, to the Board of Finance and Council on the 3rd. We've got the rates, the miscellaneous fees that you approved will be going to the Board of Finance and Council on June 3rd. We also have several grants for acceptance, and then the EV tariff that we're going to discuss tonight would also be on the agenda for the 3rd. Maybe one or two other items. It's a bit of a kitchen sink for us on the 3rd. And we have our commission report scheduled for that evening as well, the annual update that Chair Moody gives on behalf of the commission at City Council. So a number of items there. H-289, the renewable energy standard I mentioned earlier, that has passed the Senate and has passed the House, so it's heading to the governor. It sounds like that could be a bill that might have a veto, and if that's the case, there'd be a veto override, I believe, in June. So we've been supportive of that bill. It makes some significant changes and would have us procure more new renewables, new meaning post-2010 renewables, which is primarily going to be wind and solar, to meet our growing load over a period of time. So we understand that's an additional commitment for our customers, but at the same time, we understand that that would be supported by a simultaneously growing load from electrification, in which case we're going to need more renewables, and we'd be in a good position to make reasonable purchases of new renewables to meet those requirements. So we're hopeful that that bill will be enacted, and there's more to come in that journey. I listed a number of community events that we're going to be participating in, and obviously we welcome the commission, members of the public, anybody who's interested for these events. We have coming up this weekend, May 11th, we're supporting the transplant sale South Champlain and Maple, which benefits the Pride Center of Vermont's transgender programs. We have a date change on the Vermont Green game. I think that's going to be July 7th. Am I getting that right? Yes. July 7th. On here I had June 1st, but we've had a change. But we are going to be partnering with Green Mountain Power to showcase electric vehicles for our joint customers who might be attending the Vermont Green soccer game that evening at Virtue Field. June 6th and 26th, we'll have customer nights at the ballpark with the Lake Monsters. We'll have energy efficiency team out there talking to customers about opportunities to save energy. We will have a booth at the Juneteenth celebration, which is taking place on June 15th downtown. We're going to have the F-150 Lightning EV over at the Fletcher Free Library on June 22nd for an event that they're hosting. And then August 1st is our evening at Somerville, where we do have a tent set up to talk with customers there. So some events there, more obviously coming, but we're excited to be out in the community this summer. And given our lengthy agenda, I will pause there. Glad to answer any additional questions.
Anyone?
I'm good.
All good?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was a lot to swallow. Next up, item number 6 on our agenda would be the March FY24 financials with Emily. Yeah, I think it's going to be. I think you're going to be on stage for a minute here.
2024 financials. So for the month of March, we had a positive net income of $3,000 compared to
Nice.
a budgeted net loss of $669,000. So it was a good month with the $3,000 net income. It's a positive variance, obviously, of $672,000. Running down from the top, sales to customers continuing to track very much on budget, only a positive variance of only $5,000. Sales for the year is still within 1% of budget. Other revenues, very small for this month, negative variance of $2,000, mostly EEU reimbursements there. Net power supply expense was favorable to budget by $26,000. Again, with all of the components of that. McNeil production was 59% below budget, therefore we saved significantly on fuel costs to the tune of $459,000. Transmission was favorable this month as well, $109,000. Offsetting those favorable variances, we purchased more than we had planned from the ISO exchange. So purchase power was $541,000, worse than budget, but generally those two effects canceled each other out. For the year to date, the purchase power portion of power supply expense has a negative variance of $541,000, but net power supply, that line there, is just about on budget. You can see there's a very small $32,000 favorable variance. Other operating expense, other operating and maintenance expense, favorable for this month, significantly $441,000. Most of that is timing of one-time adjustments that were made to, true up invoices that were received late and that sort of thing. We continue to see some labor and benefit savings from the number of vacant positions. And then other income below the line, favorable by $199,000, most of that due to timing of asset retirements that are not happening when planned. So year to date, actual net income of $2.3 million compared to the budgeted net income at this point in the year of about $1 million. So a favorable variance of $1,276,000. Questions?
Questions,
No.
anyone?
All right, I'll move to our next page. Sorry. Hold on. There we go. So capital spending through March, 43% of the full year capital budget. We are at $4.7 million spent of a budget for this point in the year of $5.9 million. We've spent about $700,000 more than last month. Significant activity in the distribution area. And then the McNeil outage started a couple of weeks ago, so there'll be some capital spending showing up in April and May results under the production line. And going down to our rating metrics. To cash first. Operating cash, $6.761 million. That compares to a budget at this point of $8.5 million. So we were running about $500,000 under budget last month, and now we're about $1.3 million under budget. Which we had been forecasting cash to be tight June 30, so we're kind of seeing that come into view now. And our credit rating factors, debt service coverage is healthy at 4.78, adjusted debt service coverage also good at 1.51, and days cash on hand 108. And I can say that our latest projection, our latest forecast for fiscal year end, net income is still looking strong, Latest forecast is around 2 million, which would yield an ADSCR of 1.2, which would be a significant improvement to budget if that comes to pass. Cash is going to be right around 90, however.
Questions? Anyone? All right.
No.
All righty, that moves us to the continuation of this financial stuff with the FY25 budget.
I'm just going to pass out. This is in your packets. This is the income statement page, which is the thing that we go over in the financial reviews.
Thanks,
This is the highlights of it. And I don't actually show that in the slides, so I just wanted you to have it for reference.
Okay.
So you know what I'm showing. Okay. So FY25 budget. Before we get into it, I first want to acknowledge Cheryl Mitchell, our financial analyst, who's online with us on Teams. She does an incredible amount of excellent work every year in putting the budget together, flowing, riding along with us through all the last minute changes and the cuts and the adjustments, making sure we don't miss anything, making sure that we recognize all of the consequences of a change here affects, 5 things over here. So thank you very much, Cheryl. Okay, so overall context, this is mostly for the Board of Finance and Council, because I'm hoping that for you, with whom we discuss these things every month, this won't be big news, right? Sales to customers are essentially flat still. We are making progress, obviously, on residential electrification, but we're not seeing the growth in commercial electrification yet. At the same time, commercial buildings are becoming more efficient, and we have less square foot of commercial space in the city. So we're not seeing the inroads yet from the electrification in terms of increased sales. The past 3 years of requested rate increases have been less than our demonstrated need. In this budget, there are lower assumed forward prices for the sale of excess winter energy. That increases pressure to sort of balance the budget or to have the budget result in favorable metrics, but it does reduce downside risk for us, because if those prices don't materialize, there's less risk of that because there are lower assumptions to start with. Continued inflationary pressures, obviously, and given the economic environment. We have level funded, controllable operating expenses, and there's a slide in more detail on what we consider controllable. As I just discussed, we don't have a great starting cash position for FY25, or we're not thinking that we're going to, largely due to the rec revenues shortfall that we've been dealing with this year. It's a big piece of it. And then the lower energy prices for excess winter energy sales this winter. This budget will be the last budget we draw upon the construction fund for the 2022 net zero revenue bond. And our goal for this budget was to make a modest improvement in our Moody's rating metrics while keeping the rate increase as low as we could. So key assumptions. Operating revenues are 67.6 million. That's 3.8% higher than in FY24. We've assumed a rate increase of 5.5% effective September 1st. flat kilowatt hour sales to customers, as I said. Rec sales revenue are down in this budget compared to last year by 7.4% due to lower production volumes from our renewable resources in calendar year 2024. And we have assumed new conduit rental rates, which will be effective July 1st. Operating expenses are up 2% from FY24's budget. Sales of excess winter energy are down significantly, down 3.5 million. That's a 78% reduction. That's due to a combination of lower forward prices and then lower assumed production volumes. So basically less excess energy to sell and then lower prices to be received for that excess energy. I've included here what the assumptions are for the energy prices. Around the clock, 24/7, 365 a year average is $52.16 in this budget. FY24, that average was $73.60. And then you can particularly see in the winter, December through February prices are $72, $93, and $84 per megawatt hour, respectively. In FY24, those were $119, $155, $144. So significant reduction there. Transmission is again up, and again up significantly, an 8% increase, $783,000. Net power supply expense per megawatt hour. So this is a good ratio to look at because if your costs are going up but you're serving more load, you'd expect your cost to go up, right? So the expense per megawatt hour of load served is 54 cents higher than the FY24 budget. We're assuming a 4% cost of living increase for employees per the IBEW contract. Significant in this budget is the amount of grants and capital contributions. It's pegged at $2.2 million. That's $1.8 million higher than this current year. Most of that's based on construction activity in the city, the Champlain Parkway, Main Streets, Great Streets, the Winooski Bridge being rebuilt, all of those projects. We are being asked to do work in support of those projects, and we will be reimbursed for that. So total net income projection for this budget is $3.4 million, $3 million more than our FY24 budget is passed. And our operating cash projection is $9.8 million, which is $1 million more than this current year budget. Also significantly, as you can see on this sheet, the red line in the middle, our operating loss is budgeted at $644,000. I would love for this to be black, but $644,000 net operating loss is far better than the $1.9 million operating loss we had budgeted in for FY24. So to me, that's a significant step in the right direction. I'm now going to go quickly through some pictures, just so you can see some things in context for this budget. So that's megawatt hour sales. You've seen a version of this pretty recently. We only have this, we have actuals through 2023 here because it's on a fiscal year basis. So you can see that kind of flat to declining trend. This is rec sales. So you can see the height of the euphoria in the 14, 15, 16, and then kind of where we've been pretty steady Eddie since FY19, but you can see FY25 is a bit reduced from FY24 due to those lower volumes. Prices per actual rec are pretty much even or maybe $1 more for some resources in FY25. So that reduction is pretty much all volume driven. There's fuel. The budgeted price per ton is down this year as well as the projected volume. There's purchase power. So again, that expense is going up, but as James always inserts helpfully, it's not really an increased cost. it's a reduction in power supply revenue that's causing that change. And there's transmission. It only goes in one direction.
Sorry, when we were talking about drivers of rate change earlier, like this is a significant driver, and it's outside of our control because we pay to be connected to the grid. But you can see that, you know, in the span of 4 or 5 years, we're talking about several $1 million of additional cost, and roughly speaking, you know, $550,000, $600,000 is a percent on rates. So this is a driver annually of rate change.
And Emily saved me from saying it, which is this doesn't go down, but it also is not being divided over ever increasing loads. Our loads are stable, and in fact, from some points of that graph have declined slightly. So the cost per megawatt hour of retail load of transmission is actually going up faster than this graph. So it is absolutely a cost causator.
Thanks, James.
I'm going to ask a silly question here. Is there any relationship between that and like what we the amount of money that we invest in Valco all the time? Is there some sort of,
Well,
how does that,
theoretically, right?
Well, not between the expense and what we invest in Velco. What we invest in Velco contains a return that shows up on a different line item.
Theoretically, the investments we made in Velco, the dividends we receive back, are intended to be an offset against transmission costs. They are not. They're not even a half offset at this point, I don't think. But they do provide a valuable resource back to us in terms of a return. You know, and not to go too deep into it, but there's been efforts by Velco in the past to try to advocate at the regional level for controlling some of the transmission project costs that we're seeing, because we pay a share as Vermont of the New England costs, and New England pays a share of our costs. Yeah. And so there is a little bit of a zero-sum game between how much transmission is being developed in Vermont and is paid for by the region versus how much being developed in the region paid for by Vermont. So, you know, as we, through our, you know, interactions with Velco, as we invest in transmission in Vermont, that dividend return to offset this is kept more, you know, robust. But at the same time, if the rest of the region is going and doing a lot of projects that are deemed regional, then we're paying in. So there's a bit of a zero-sum balance there.
And this expense is net of any savings we've had from load control activities. So again, you know, load control and storage are the ways you can affect these. We have done some things to affect these. This is net of that effect. But we're certainly looking, as I think Darren mentioned earlier, to expand our load control too. So.
And expanding your load control is consumption? And to
No, it's
reduce
a focus
peak
of
demand
activity.
here.
Yep.
Because part of a main driver of that transmission expense is how much
It's that
our
peak
peak
period,
demand
yeah.
is at the same time that the region and the state have a peak demand.
Okay,
So if we
'cause-
can reduce our share, then we get allocated
Right.
a smaller piece
That's
of
a
the
really
pie.
wonky thing that's always super hard to understand. But the other thing that Darren said earlier was that it helps us that McNeil is close to where, so production's close to consumption,
Not in this case.
but not, that doesn't impact this.
Not
It's not
this expense item.
This line, but if we're using the, like, bigger grid less.
Yeah.
Because we're
Doesn't-
using our own wires.
Nope, doesn't. No. So internal assets that are ISO recognized are essentially your load is reconstructed to add them back in. So it doesn't save you any regional transmission to have an ISO recognized asset. That is where things like behind the meter, like solar and all, play in a part, because ISO doesn't know about those, therefore they're not added back to your load.
Why the transmission value from McNeil separate from this line item?
There is no transmission expense for McNeil.
No, not expense. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So your transmission expense is based on your peak load, or your load at the time of the Vermont monthly peak each month. Okay. That load that they use to determine that value is your ISO settlement load, which is your obligation to ISO New England to purchase energy. To create that obligation, they take our load that we take delivery of at the Velco interconnection points, and they add back to it the load from any generators that we have that are inside of our system. The reason they do that is they can't reduce our purchasing obligation for McNeil and also pay McNeil. That would be a double compensation. McNeil is paid at the wholesale market price. Therefore, it does not reduce our loads from a market purpose for market purposes. That is the short answer, sadly.
Anything, right?
And that's super clear. But I sort of, I mean.
The gist of it is if a generator is compensated through the wholesale markets, it cannot also reduce the amount of energy you purchase from the wholesale markets, or you'd be being paid twice. Okay? And the highest hourly energy obligation you have is your peak load for transmission purposes. So internal generation is added back for energy purchases and then by default for transmission obligation.
So is the same true for any other BED-owned local generation like Winooski?
I want to try one more stab at
It is.
maybe.
It is true. Can I just answer that last question real quick, Darren? It is true for any generation inside Burlington, regardless of who owns it, if ISO compensates that generator through the wholesale markets. If ISO doesn't compensate that generator, like South 40 or the solar on the back part of BED's building, that is not. Then it does save us transmission.
James, at the possible risk of overextending this conversation further, maybe because here we're talking about ISO transmission expenses. When we're talking about generators that are connected in Burlington, is there a Velco credit that we're referring to there?
There is a Velco credit, which is
Putting on their infrastructure. We're keeping
that is
it on
that
our
is
own.
a different thing. That is the Velco IGAP credit, and it's hard to say which generators give us that credit because we have excess credit, but McNeil contributes to our credit, as does any generator in Vermont, regardless of whose transmission grid it's connected to. That's why it's not because it's in Burlington, it's because it's a generator in Vermont that is connected to the transmission grid. So we get an IGAP credit for Georgia Mountain Wind, we get an IGAP credit for Sheffield, we get an IGAP credit for the GT, we get an IGAP credit for McNeil, all of those. And we have more credit than we can, and we have more credit than we can use. So some of those are derated in effect.
I don't think it's possible, but I would love to see like $1, like a 1 BE dollar, and what's making up all those costs. Can you do that, or
Sure.
no, it's too complicated?
No,
Like, is it
costs?
transmission, like, if we're spending, let's say it's $1, transmission costs 25%, is labor and staffing 10%?
We have that, yeah.
You have that?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, sure, yeah. But transmission will be a double-digit percentage of the total.
So can I ask one more question about this rising transmission expense? So it comes from ISO New England, right? Some of it we're subject to by decisions they make, and some we're subject to by our monthly peak.
It
Yeah,
comes from multiple sources. The biggest is ISO New England.
So are
We
there,
pay transmit. Sorry, Darren. Go ahead.
Except for, I think it might be easier if we have like less exact but more simple answer.
Well, but the danger is simplicity that isn't accurate is dangerous. So that's all I'm being careful about.
well, yeah,
Definitely,
let me,
if you want to think about the driver here.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
fact
that's
that
my
this
question.
is-
What are the levers
The
here?
fact that this is going in the direction that it's going, I would venture to say, and anyone can correct me, that it is the fact that in the region, we are seeing an increased development of transmission and costs associated with that transmission that's being regionalized through the ISO New England, that comes back to us through Velco with different formulas and applications. And so if the region is building more transmission and it's being covered in a regional cost allocation, then a lot of that is flowing back right here. If we were more stagnant on transmission, this line would theoretically be a little more level. And then there's a second input that's not really showing up here, which is how much is Vermont developing transmission and how much are we as a shareholder of Velco getting return on that? You'll see that in a different line item, which is the Velco dividend line, which partially, but not fully in any way, offsets this line, if that's a helpful.
And
That's exactly what I was getting at. Wondering, and is there anything that we can do about that? And the answer sounds like probably not.
Not very much. I mean, we as an entity are not a significant enough entity within the region to impact those decisions. we as Vermont and we as Velco have had some limited success in the past, I think, advocating for better cost control in the region. You have to think about there's 6 different PUCs. There's the ISO as the operator. There are different market players, obviously, doing different things. So there's a limit to what we can do, and I view this very much as not a controllable cost. It's something that we simply pay to be connected to the system, more or less.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct, Darren. At the highest level, the biggest single driver is probably increased investment and cost increases, because it's not just the investment, it's the operating costs associated with the New England transmission grid are the biggest drivers. But in the interest of, sort of don't feel bad, the initial briefing on how transmission works that we give to finance people is like an hour and a half, and that's just at the high level. So again, it is an ugly set of formulas.
Thanks.
That slide
I
was
knew
worth
I
its
added
weight.
slides at risk. Okay.
How do you follow that up?
So here's O&M expense, not counting power supply or purchase power, fuel, or transmission. Here you can see where we've level funded FY25 compared to the FY24 budget. I'm going to venture off script a minute to answer Commissioner Whitaker's question. Just give me a second. I don't have the split out of the BED dollar for FY25, but I do have it for the FY24 budget. So let me hide stuff. So this is hopefully like illustrative. It hasn't changed, I don't think, crazily enough to matter. So you can see that's the whole operating expense budget, the little piece of pie, with fuel blue, purchase power is red, transmission is green. So you can see that's basically half of our expense budget, right, is power supply. And then this purple is the O&M, and blowing up the purple, you can see that 57% of that is labor or labor overhead, benefits, and pension. 12% is the next biggest piece of the pie. That's what we call outside services, so basically consultants or vendors, OEM coming in to do maintenance or repairs. DSM rebates, that means EEU incentive payments, which appear both on the revenue and on the expense. So that's the expense side of the EEU. Materials and supplies, that's stock coming out of inventory. And then maintenance contracts, that's for software mostly. Tier 3 compliance is our annual and ever increasing expense obligation, and then insurance, and then you get all the other things that are kind of too small to break out from, publications and business cards and the like.
Right. And so then if someone's thinking, why are we having the rate increase? It's which of these levers is generally?
Labor.
Yeah.
Benefits. Maintenance contracts. Transmission.
So
Tier 3 compliance and
cost
Tier
of
1 compliance.
inflation and this, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Loss of rec revenues.
Loss of rec revenues. Yep, thanks, James. So I hope that was on us.
And to be clear, loss of rec revenues due to the underproduction at some of our assets.
Which has already occurred. I mean, that's not like projected underproduction, that's past underproduction because the rec markets have a delay.
Like a wind turbine produced less than expected.
In 2024, yields less energy rec revenues in FY25 because of the delay.
Okay, I think I've got back on course now. So here is the controllable expense slide that I said I would explain later. So we cut about $1.5 million of operating expense during the FY25 budget development. So what we call controllable costs are you take that O&M line and you take out the EEU reimbursement, which is all driven by customer decisions to have, justify an incentive. Take out transmission, you take out tier 3 compliance, and then you take out the return from capital expenses on A and G. So this is actually, $80,000 less actually than the FY24 budget. And the red line just shows between kind of FY 2007 and 2016, we were on a pace where operating expenses were increasing almost 6% year over year. The blue is showing kind of what's actually happened versus what that trend where we would have been if we'd continued to follow that trend. So since FY16, we've been around a 3.3% on average over all those years increase. Okay, we're going to turn to capital. So we have a capital budget this fiscal year of $11.7 million. Just over $500,000 of that is a Velco equity investment. So if you take that part out, it's an $11 million investment in BED's utility plant. That's distribution system, generating assets, EV chargers, fleet vehicles. Let's see, that's, I already said all those things at the bottom, that's being funded. This is assuming financing $3 million from the general obligation bond that we receive every year, and then $8.9 million from the 2022 net zero revenue bond construction fund. And then the pie chart shows sort of the distribution of that capital budget among the various plant categories. So the green at the bottom, 50% is the distribution system. That always gets the lion's share. Production is our generating facilities, and the upper right, the royal blue color, 21%. And then sort of general plant facilities and vehicles is the next biggest. Oh, that also includes IT and the sort of teal blue upper left, 21%. Then you can see the Velco transmission slice is the purple, and then everything else is other. This is a new slide. I just wanted to show you, there's not much we can do about this right now, but it is a reason why we will be turning more and more to revenue bond funding. You can see that the GEO bond, the $3 million that we receive, in 2013, that was 58% of our operating budget, or sorry, for our capital budget. Now it's only 27%. So the capital budget has increased with inflation, but the GEO bond level has remained the same at $3 million. And so for a period of time, we essentially had a capital budget that was closer to $3 to $4 million for a long time, kind of early in the early 2000s. And then we would do a revenue bond when we had to make a big infrastructure investment, like when we purchased Winooski 1, for example, or we put in the smart meters. Now we're in a position where the value of that GEO bond has eroded over time, so that we're needing to fund our sort of regular old capital plan to invest in the distribution system and our existing assets with revenue bond funding. That, and coupled with the fact that since we did invest in smart meters and we bought Winooski 1, our overall plant, our asset base has increased. So it requires more capital investment every year to maintain that set of assets. So the reason I say we can't do much about this now is that obviously general obligation funding is tied to the city's overall debt limit, and the city is debt constrained right now. So we've told the city that someday we would love to increase this, but we understand that they're not in a position to do that right now. But that is a reason that we'll be seeking another revenue bond probably sometime in the next 12 to 18 months. Because we'll need additional financing to cover our capital budget. All right, let's see, where are we? At zero. You want to do this one, Darren?
I would. So obviously, we'll continue to be 100% renewable in FY25 as we were in FY24 and the decade prior. The budget includes, with the revenue bond providing the enhanced liquidity, our boosted incentives across a variety of categories. Obviously, we have, through state legislation, we've discussed the new super user incentive program, which is launched. We're waiting for our first incentive to come in. So if there are any high mileage drivers who are thinking of switching to an EV, we want to encourage them to look at the super user incentive, which is boosted from our traditional EV incentive. All the different electrification incentives, our geothermal test well programs, our charging incentives. You can see here a little over 1.4 million for Tier 3 rebates. This number has continued to advance year over year. It's one of the few aspects of the budget that when it grows, I'm happy to see as opposed to concerned, because this is really our investment in electrification, and then combined with over $2 million of investment in energy efficiency and complementary programs, a really robust, almost $3.5 million roughly in incentive and rebate investment in this budget. Importantly, with the revenue bond, we have matching funds when we've been able to apply for federal grants. That was a great fortuitous circumstance with the IRA and the infrastructure bill passing and us having the revenue bond kind of at the same time. So we have already been, looking at those opportunities. We've been relatively successful in bringing in federal dollars. We have the ability to continue to apply for, and we are applying for, additional grants where it's strategic. We will continue to do more level 3, level 2 public chargers. And we can talk about this piece in more detail, but we're contemplating something of a reverse RFP to go out to the community, every entity in the community, whether it's a member of the public, a business, a nonprofit, another city department, the school district, and say, if you're interested in hosting a public level 2 or level 3 charger, we'll have a simple form they can fill out, they can submit to our team, and then we can evaluate based on what the electrical infrastructure is in that location, any other barriers in terms of access, look at the Justice 40 criteria for income and equity, and try to develop our plan, not based on what we think is needed, but based on what the community comes back to us and says, hey, we have a need for a charger and we're able to host a site. So I think that could be an interesting opportunity for engagement, and we're going to do that this budget year. We'll keep working on electrifying our fleet. Paul Alexander and his team are going to be working on submitting grant applications for an additional electric bucket truck. We'd like to have a second one to join the first one in the state of Vermont. And if we're successful, we'll look to do that. The heat pump pilot program we've talked about already, and Emily has mentioned the work that we'll do to plan for a future revenue bond issuance. So these items, as well as we'll continue to engage on policy with the state and with the city council that helps advance the net zero mission and goals for Burlington. So a good, strong investment within this budget for those items. And I wish Mr. Goodkind was here to see this. Maybe he's watching at home. But this is the promised slide on the district energy resolution. As mentioned, we've completed the wood chip dryer RFI. We did receive responses to that. We have included resource within the budget to begin the process of procuring a wood chip dryer, pending joint owners agreement and consultation, pending any additional procurement processes that we need to go through. There were some other interesting things that came back to us as part of that, because we didn't limit it just to wood chip dryers. We said, give us your other ideas for efficiency. There was one concept related to a thermal coating that you can apply to the boiler that can improve combustion efficiency. So we're looking into that with a vendor. And there's also a potential for a controls optimization that really actually stemmed initially from a Delta Climb a business accelerator project, but that may relate here as well. So we'll be looking at advancing those initiatives in FY25. We've included $25,000 in the FY25 budget for the third-party study on forestry to be conducted by RFP. We've included an additional $25,000 in FY25 for the study that would be managed by the TUC and the Electric Commission on some of the future analyses related to McNeil. And just for context, we've done some prior studies on McNeil that have been referenced in the past. We did a study with VEIC on the carbon footprint related to McNeil. I know there's some people who don't like that study, but just from a cost standpoint, I wanted to point out that the $25,000 is significantly more than what we had to pay for the VEIC study, and also significantly more than what we paid for the economic and carbon footprint analyses of McNeil that were prepared in 2023 by Innovative Natural Resource Solutions. So that number wasn't just chosen out of kind of randomness. We really looked back at some of the studies that we've done in the past on the plant and made sure we included a larger number in this budget to support that process at the TUC. Back to you.
Okay, so the new this year in our budget overview, we wanted to highlight our continued work in advancing equity and accessibility of programs. So in the 25 budget, we're assuming obviously we're going to continue the energy assistance program at a 12.5% discount rate. We are still waiting on PUC approval for that to become a permanent program. Our project and equity analyst will continue outreach in the community and at community events. I won't run through everything that's listed here. We've developed good partnerships with various community organizations, significantly CVOEO, Legal Aid, AALV, the Vermont Language Justice Task Force, among others. And then we are in the works, early planning stages, I would say, on working through the CVOEO Ambassadors Program to do some focus groups with various cultural groups in Burlington on, energy, electricity use, just quality of life in the home, kind of engaging those communities that are often hard for us to hear from. So that's something we're excited about. And then also excited about some new communications efforts in conjunction with our communications team. Ita Meno and Jen Green have launched a new program on Town Meeting TV, which is called like Equity and Energy or Equity and Electricity.
It's like a working title, yes.
I forget what we landed on, but it's meant to be a more informal dialogue, kind of more approachable show that sort of breaks things down into layperson's terms as a complement to our Net Zero Energy podcast, which can be kind of energy geeky, which is, great for energy geeks, but we wanted to have something that was approachable as well. And we've gotten a video out that walks people through how to read your electric bill and what the various pieces of that bill mean, translated into multiple languages, and we're planning future videos along those lines on various energy and electricity and net zero topics. Okay, we're almost through this part, I promise. So here's where the metrics are projected to be for FY25. Days cash on hand slightly stronger at 94. Debt service coverage ratio also stronger, 4.88. And then the adjusted debt service coverage ratio, 1.2, projected for this budget. And then kind of a preview of coming events. So we've talked quite a bit about the more conservative assumptions for the winter power supply. Darren, I believe, mentioned in his GM update the pending hopeful legislative and gubernatorial approval of our charter change to increase our line of credit. That's now pending a Senate vote, I believe. We have an RFP out for the line of credit. We've been with KeyBank quite a while. We've been renewing with KeyBank. We thought it would be a good time with a potential increase in the value of the line to sort of solicit more proposals and kind of get a more competitive updating on pricing from multiple banks. Those bids are due next week, so we'll be taking a request to approve the new terms of that line in June. Also taking to council in June the miscellaneous service fees proposal that Darren mentioned before we file it with the PUC. And then I've mentioned the future revenue bond issuance. We're tracking carefully the money left in the 2022 construction fund and trying to game out, okay, when will that end? And then when, we're also watching interest rates, obviously, closely. So at this point, what we're planning to do, and this could change, but we're planning to put a ballot item on in November to get approval of a revenue bond, but then the timing of when we issue it may be next March, it might be next June or July, it might be next fall. Like, we'd want to, we'll have to frame up the wording of that ballot item and also see kind of how spending goes between now and October on the existing construction fund. See what our burn rate is of that funding and when we'll need a new infusion, essentially. And it's also likely, I didn't put this on here, but along with that ballot item, we would most likely seek approval to issue another kind of tax exempt revenue bond for capital investment in BD facilities, as well as a taxable bond to fund future Velco equity calls. So you saw that, like, our capital budget's going up, transmission expenses are going up, Velco's capital budget is going up, which means they need financing. So they're issuing new debt, but then they're also issuing calls to the owners for more equity, and they have more calls planned over the next 3 to 4 years, which, if we can bundle them all together and then borrow to fund them, we should make more on the dividend than we'll pay in the interest for the bond, if that makes sense. But that would be a severe challenge for us cash flow wise if we were to try to fund those investments out of reserves. We just don't have it right now. And then Darren mentioned also the renewable energy standard update. And I think, yeah, that was it before we go to the rate case. So I can proceed through those slides, or we can pause here, however you'd like to proceed.
Take a pause here for a couple of things. First, any questions from commissioners, and especially if anyone wants to drill down on any of the detailed stuff that we have in our packet.
No?
I have a couple questions. I mean, this was extremely thorough. Thank you. Sure. This is probably simple, but the tier 3 compliance costs jumped out. Are those like regulatory, legal, measurement and verification type costs? It's a pretty substantial number relative to the program size. What are those?
So let's see. We have, under the renewable energy standard, we have an obligation to implement strategic electrification programs and to have expenditures on those increase in proportion to our load every year. So a higher and higher percent of our load served every year. Prior to 2021 or 2022, we used to just expense those as they came in. So, $500 rebate for, whatever, right? We would just expense that. But because we, for several years, have had incentive activity, program activity that's higher than our obligation, we have credits in the bank, so to speak, and we changed to an inventory accounting system where we kind of issue a rebate, we get so many credits for that, we put that credit in the bank, and each credit goes into the bank at sort of an average cost per credit. Some programs are more sort of economic than others in terms of the fossil fuel reduction that they achieve. And so now what we do to compute that expense is we take the average cost of all the credits in the bank and we say, okay, our compliance obligation is X number of credits this year. Multiply that by the average cost of the credits in the bank. We'll take you out of the bank. We'll say, here's our payment, metaphorically, and that's our compliance expense.
Oh, okay, got it.
So
I
it
was
is
thinking it was
mandated.
like paying somebody else.
Well, we're
but it's-
paying the customers,
Right.
right? But then we have to book that cost, right? The cost of issuing those EV rebates, those heat pump rebates,
Got
right?
it,
And
okay.
so instead of taking like the straight cost of the check we cut, in real time, we're kind of doing this inventory accounting of putting those credits in the bank, taking the average, and then looking at our obligation of number of credits we have to, we need to report to comply, and assigning a unit cost to
Got it.
those.
Thank you. I misunderstood that
No, it's
totally, so thank
great
you for explaining
question.
that to me.
And I'll just mention real quick, that was done concurrently with the same treatment being changed for our rec accounting as well. And subsequent to that, FERC has now ordered that recs need to be treated on an inventory accounting basis. So we were actually ahead of that But it's just recognizing that we're not going to expense and revenue items as they occur. We're going to recognize the fact that they have lifespans greater than 1 year and value them accordingly.
Thank you. So I'll just limit it to, so anyone else have a question before?
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is, so curious about I think the rate increase makes sense, right, in light of, I think you set the table for this last meeting, Darren, General Manager Springer, excuse me.
Superintendent, maybe. at one
Yes.
point. I think that was the old title. It was.
It
Yep.
was, okay.
Yes.
So, at any rate, so that makes sense, and sort of to take bites off it rather than surprising ratepayers with 15% 1 year and 0 for other years. But the net income is looking good for fiscal year '25, and so compared to prior years. And so I think this is just like a simplistic question. So if we're looking at a $3.3 million net income in the FY25 budget, why do we need the rate increase? And I think you've made this case, but I think that's a fair question for the ratepayer, so I wanted to ask it.
Yeah, I mean, big part of the answer to that is the grants and capital contributions line, 2.2 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's non-operating revenue. It's, other income, non-operating. And then from a rate case cost of service perspective, that's not known and measurable. I mean, we have budget projections for it, but we can't count on that materializing in the period of time, and it's not recurring, right? It just happens that we think next year is going to be a good year for construction and capital contributions from customers. But you can see over the past 4 or 5 years the variation in that line.
Right.
So that flows to that $3.3 million net income. But if you wipe out the 2.1, right, then your net income is a lot less rich. So that's one quick answer
So
to
to
that.
paraphrase
question.
back to you,
Yeah.
so is it fair to say you're budgeting for a normal year, not a one-time good year? Okay.
Right. You kind of have to look at your core base recurring operating expenses and then your core base operating revenues. And that's essentially what the Excel model that we turn into the DPS and the PUC looks at. But they have to be, every number in there kind of has to be provable to some extent.
The other big piece, though, that we should keep in mind, too, is given what Emily just said about the kind of grants and capital contributions, if you look at the operating income net,
Right.
it's still negative,
Right.
which is kind of the basic, it's improved, but it's still negative. And I think Emily said earlier she'd very much like to see that, be a positive. And that would speak to kind of greater health of our core business with sales to customers, and those have been flat. So when we look at the financial ratings metrics from Moody's, which are obviously critical to maintaining our A rating for the bond, and we want to do another bond in the near future, the adjusted debt coverage ratio is, even with that net income being what it is still at a level that is, in the realm of kind of where we've been to maintain that rating, but not quite at the target level for us, which is the 1.5. And then the days cash on hand are a bit above the A rating minimum, which is 90, but not so far above as to give a great amount of cushion. So another factor is definitely wanting to maintain the A rating for the electric utility and the ability to borrow again in the future at a lower capital or lower interest cost is another big consideration.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Going once? If there are no other questions on the FY25 budget, there is a suggested motion.
I will make the motion to approve the department's fiscal year 2025 capital and operating budgets as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. 4 to nothing. The ayes have it. The budget passes. Before I go on to the next item number 8, sir, you came in a bit late for public comment, but I'd like to give you a second if you had something to say.
I had actually called in the drive out here, so I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Always want to give an opportunity. You came in late, so fantastic. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us and listening in. We appreciate it. All right, on to item number 8. That would be the 2024 rate increase. Again, Emily's got the floor.
Yes, and with this item, I think there's not a lot of big updates since last meeting. I can run through the slides that we shared last meeting if the commission would find it helpful. We were projecting the 5.5, at your April meeting.
I think if you could do it anyway, just
Yep.
for the audience's
You
benefit,
bet, you bet.
that'd be great.
Okay,
The Reader's Digest version or something.
yeah. Okay, so we're requesting tonight from the commission approval to bring to the city council a rate request of up to 5.5%. I'll start with saying we're still working on our cost of service to see, what we can justify using the measurement or benchmarks that we've been provided by the Department of Public Service. I'm fairly comfortable it will be well above 5.5%, but we haven't finished, so I don't exactly know yet. So we're requesting that the commission give us kind of latitude up to 5%, and we won't exceed that, obviously. So BED rate changes since 1980. You can see there's quite a variation here. And then we also had a 12-year stretch from 2009 to 2021 with no rate increase at all. In the past 4 years, we have needed to increase rates again. We've tried to do that as modestly as we can, but given the 12 years without one, there was to some degree some pent-up rate pressure that we're still working off a little bit. This is the past 4 years of requested rate changes versus the cost of service that we presented or filed with the Public Utility Commission. And so you can see that each year we've been able, or we believe anyway, we've been able to justify a significantly higher rate increase than the one that we requested. I expect again that will be the case in 2024, but again, we're still doing that work. The thing, this actually is a new slide from last time, so this is good information. Overall in the US, electricity prices have been rising faster than inflation. You can see that's 7.7% annually over the last 3 years due to transmission cost increases, as we just covered, volatility in fuel prices. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more, this one?
Well, this one's just one that we've tried to add for context. Inflation has moderated to some extent. It's still, as the chart here talks about, electricity inflation itself has still been referred to as sticky, challenging to get down to the Fed's preferred level of 2%. But electricity has been far beyond where inflation's been. And that 7.7% annual increases, we know for a fact that in 2022, for example, there were utilities in our region and even in neighboring states with double and triple digit rate increases due to the volatility in the market. So when we talk earlier about our policy in Burlington and Vermont's policy has been to have long-term stably priced contracts. We didn't see a double or triple digit rate increase during this period of time. And if we had been exposed more fully to the market, we might have. So there are pluses and minuses to having these resources that we have. And during that period of time, you saw some of the pluses, I guess, would be one of the points. But overall, our rate changes have been lower over the past 3 years than what that annual increase for electricity has been. Just for context. Doesn't make anyone feel any better. We would prefer to keep the rate change even lower than it is, but just for context.
So this is showing the change in the cost of BED electricity versus other goods and services since 2010. The high light green line is the cost of housing. The tealish blue is healthcare or medical costs. The red line in the middle here is inflation. The purple is education, and then the blue, the royal blue at the bottom is BED electricity.
It would be interesting to see gas prices, either natural gas or petroleum. You know, because I think those are more substitutes.
So this is residential rates. Blue line at the top is New England. Vermont other, which we're using GMP as a proxy for, is red. Green is BED with the proposed increase, and then the purple is BED Energy Assistance Program with the proposed increase. So still very much lower than the rest of Vermont and New England on the residential side. Commercial industrial rates, we are still lower than New England, for which we don't have most recent data. We are higher than GMP, but only by a little bit and only pretty recently. And then this is the total cost to serve both residential and commercial and industrial combined. Again, we are lower than the rest of New England and the rest of Vermont, even with the proposed increase. The effect on your average customer bill. This will vary, obviously, with the amount of usage a customer has, but the average monthly usage for a residential customer is 410 kilowatt hours. At that level, their bill would go up by $4.51 a month. And for your small general service customer, an increase of $5.71 on the monthly bill. And then I think this is the last slide on the Energy Assistance Program. As I said, this is still in a pilot stage. We're waiting for the PUC to approve a tariff to make this a permanent program. The estimated bill impact here is $5.33 on average. The reason being that the average usage of folks enrolled in this program is a little higher. Hard to say why that is. It's a pretty small sample size, you know, only 238 customers compared to all of the residential customers. But that would be the bill impact for them. And that was it on the rate increase request. Happy to answer questions as always.
Who's that? Questions?
Just a question, you showed the one where it says like you could ask for 7.5, but you're only asking for 5. Where does that other 2.5% go?
Where does the other 2.5%
So if you really
go?
need $7.50, but you're only getting 5, what happens to that money that you need but you're not getting?
It results in a net loss, you know, it results in reduced cash balances, right? You see the effects, you know, on our financial results,
Yeah.
essentially, right? Because,
We can't eat it because,
huh?
we can't
We're
eat
eating
it.
We're eating it? I mean, are we
It's
kind eating
eroding
that
some
gut?
of our other
Yeah, correct.
metrics, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Just the last comment, the
Yeah,
only
go
thing
ahead.
that isn't good is that it's so expensive to do business in Burlington. And it makes it look like it's still, but it might be minuscule.
On the commercial rates? Yeah, we were lower than average for a period of time. The only thing I would mention on the commercial side is, I think we compare, if I'm remembering correctly, to kind of the commercial industrial on there. And most states have, or you know, where they break it down, they'll have a commercial rate and an industrial rate. And the industrial rate will be much cheaper per kilowatt hour, although it probably has a higher demand charge. So yeah, that's a commercial and industrial rate comparison. Ours is essentially a one rate commercial. We don't really have industrial customers per se. We have a few that might kind of fit in that category, and we have a primary rate, you know, for a customer that has some of their own infrastructure. But This may not be a pure apples to apples. Like what you would want to do if you were thinking about it from a small business standpoint is look at our small general service rate and compare that to a similar rate structure that exists either in other utilities in Vermont or New England. So not to say that this isn't some level of concern, because I'd prefer for us to be below the average nonetheless, but it may not be a pure apples to apples if you're thinking of it from kind of a small business standpoint.
Fair enough. If I was a city councilor, though, I would.
I mean, we're good on the residential side, one of the lowest still in the state and in the region. And, you know, this is why some utilities have created where they have an industrial customer, they have a very specific rate for that class of customer to try to differentiate. But yeah, no, I admit, like I looked at this as well, and you can see we've crossed a couple times, and my hope would be that we're able to moderate enough that we can cross again in a favorable direction in the near future.
Other questions? Okay, no more questions. There is a suggested motion to be made.
I make a motion to recommend to the Board of Finance and the City Council authorization to pursue a rate increase up to but not exceeding 5.5% for bills rendered beginning September 1st, 2024.
We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed indicate by saying nay. 4 ayes, no nays. The motion passes. Thank you. On to item number 9, FY23 General Obligation Bond Authorization. Again, Emily.
So no slides for this one, happily. This is simply our annual request to authorize or to recommend that the city chief administrative officer authorize our annual $3 million obligation bond as provided in the city charter to help fund capital improvements to the distribution plant and other assets.
That's kind of it. Just for Andy's. All right. Any questions on that? Yeah, this one's kind
Your
of
turn.
boiler.
I make a motion, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. There's a suggested motion.
I make a motion to recommend to the Board of Finance and the City Council to authorize and direct the Chief Administrative Officer to pledge the credit of the city by issuing general obligation bonds in an amount of $3 million for the purpose of funding BED capital improvements in accordance with the city charter.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and seconded. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those, yeah, what's the word? I'm losing my mind here. All those approve the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed indicate by saying nay. Ayes have it, 4-0. Motion passes. Whew, all right. Item number 10, pilot rate for pole-mounted EV chargers. Mr. Gibbons.
So I'd like to start by thanking Emily for driving and saving me the chaos of me trying to convert to full screen PowerPoint. So Emily is going to drive my PowerPoint for me so I don't look bad. Thank you, Emily. All right, first slide, please. Next slide, please. Sorry. So just Darren asked me to consider what we might. Darren asked me to consider what we might do for the 5 pole-mounted chargers we're installing to create an experience similar to the experience that we offer residential customers under our EV charging rate. And I'll refresh everyone's memory on about these pole-mounted chargers we're talking about on the next slide, if you could, Emily. So, well, apparently I've moved that slide. Let me say, what am I proposing? Thank you, Emily. Dynamic slide changing. So we under a state grant have proposed and are installing 5 chargers, and they're identified, or they were targeted for the 5 areas marked on the map. A through E. We got fairly close after some community engagement, and the final 5 locations are in the list on the right. They all are on non-metered street parking. When I say non-metered, I mean non-electric metered. They're non-parking metered. street locations in generally residential neighborhoods, because the grant was targeted for residential, multifamily, low to moderate income. It was targeted areas. So they ended up all being residential. They all ended up all being a use of an existing parking space that was presumably being used by residents in that area. And so Darren asked us to see what we could do to make that look more like our residential charging option. So, Emily, next slide, please. What I'm going to propose, pardon me? No, next slide. Sorry, go the other way. Yes, what I would propose won't affect any of these chargers. Okay, it will not affect any of our public chargers because they are either off street or where they are on street, they are parking metered. So when we get to the actual proposal, keep in mind that it's not going to do anything to any of our existing public chargers. And the pole-mounted chargers are in the process of being installed. They will be installed probably by mid-June at this point, we're expecting, and available for use then. Next slide, please. All right, I'll go ahead and do the rate proposal now. So what I'm proposing is a rate, it would be under the pilot rate structure, which is an 18-month pilot rate. At the end of the pilot period, you can either terminate the rate pilot or you can convert it to a full tariff. And what we would do is make this rate applicable to BED-owned public EV chargers that are located in these residential areas at street-side location where DPW isn't metering the parking. So it really would be these 5 chargers that we're talking about. The normal rate for these chargers would be the same as our then prevailing rate for any other BED-owned public EV charging station. And these are level 2 chargers, just like most of our level 2 chargers at the other locations that I showed you. Currently, that rate is 21 cents, and that is inclusive of the EEU and franchise fees, which essentially makes it have parity with our small commercial rate. So it started from the small commercial rate, but because we can't show a line item for EEU fees and a line item for franchise fees, we essentially took our small commercial rate and grossed it up to include those. And then what we would do is off-peak charging from 10 p.m. until 12 noon the following day, which is the same time period that we use under the residential EV rate, would receive a credit of 8 cents a kilowatt hour off the then prevailing rate. And essentially that would result in a net charge of 13 cents a kilowatt hour, inclusive of EEU and franchise fees again. Okay. Now, Emily, if we can go to the rate comparison slide. Thank you. So these are the rates in play. So we've got our public charging rate sitting at a base energy charge of 21 cents a kilowatt hour. Residential rate is 17.4. SG, small commercial rate, is 18.4. And both of those cut rates get just shy of an 8-cent discount under our EV rate if the customers comply with the requirements. That yields a net cost for off-peak charging of 9.4 to 10.4, and franchise fees and the EU charges are additional to that. So they're somewhere probably in the 10.4 to 11.4 range. If we do what I'm proposing, we would take the 21 cents base energy rate, and during the off-peak hours, the same off-peak hours that apply to the RS and SG under our EV rate, we would create an 8-cent discount. And by the way, the reason it's 8 cents is because these commercial charging devices can't handle past 2 decimal places. So we really need to truncate everything to 2 decimal places for public charging right now. There's only one charger that we know of that can handle more than 2 decimal places. That would give a net cost of charging of 13 cents off peak. It would include the franchise fee and the EU fee by definition. And, I'm looking at this as a reasonable proposal for a pilot rate. It creates a structure where somebody who has their own charger would not be incentivized to go utilize this street side parking to get a cheaper rate. It's more expensive than a residential customer would see at home. It doesn't bother me that it's a little more expensive because under this rate, we have paid for the capital costs of the chargers, whereas under the other 2 options, the customer has paid the capital cost of the charger. So there's a little bit of recovery potentially of our capital costs in this pilot rate structure. And if we can go to the last slide that I haven't talked about yet. During the 18-month pilot, I would suggest we should look at these 2 components, which we could not deploy right away, but which we could consider doing over time. The pole-mounted chargers do have the ability to have a rate that applies to a customer if the customer is given a specific code to use. So that creates at least the possibility for a low-income variant of this rate that would have the 12.5% discount from our EAP that would apply to customers who are eligible. We need to look at how the enrollment and verification would work for that, and how they would handle the verification to prevent people from simply telling everybody their code to get a 12.5% discount. But it is an interesting option, and I would like to see us recognize the Energy Assistance Program discount for EV charging too, which a residential customer under the EV charging rate, if there were such a customer, and there may be a couple actually, would get the EAP discount as well. And the other thing we would look at probably is there is capability for these pole mount chargers to also do on-peak load control. And there would be more parity with the residential option if we were utilizing load control. But I would be really reluctant to start utilizing load control at public charging stations without some data on how they're being used during the on-peak period first. So these would both be potential changes that you could make during the pilot period. During the pilot period, you can make a change simply by sending a letter to the Public Utility Commission. There's no lengthy process or anything like that. So if we could go back, Emily, to the proposal real quick. Or not. So again, going back to the proposal, it would be applicable to those, essentially those 5 pole mount chargers. This language would limit it to those 5 new pole mount chargers. It would be 21 cents normal rate. It would be 13 cents during the off-peak hours of 10 p.m. until noon the following day. And I would entertain questions at this point, and then I have a proposed resolution at the end.
So during this 18-month period, or maybe at the end of it, is there going to be some point where, or maybe points along the way, data points that we can look at and kind of judge how well the program's going to, I assume after the 18 months, there's an opportunity to make it permanent?
Yes. Yes, and we would need to come to you to do that. So presumably, first of all, either if we were going to implement either of the 2 R&D type of changes I talked about, we would have to come to you to change the tariff and show you what data we were relying on to suggest that, and to convert it to a permanent. Likewise, we would have to come to you to do that and show you why we thought it was a good rate structure. So again, the pilot will, if we do nothing, the pilot will terminate, right? We need council or commission approval to either convert it to a tariff permanently or to modify it. So to propose either of those things, we would need to come to you and show you why we were doing what we were doing.
And then the choosing of the spots here. I'm just curious a little bit more about how that was done, because I know I heard some hubbub online about, this may have been sort of randomized. And like, how many do we know how many people that potentially have EVs near these things that would use them, or how did that?
Well,
these
that's
spots
not
get,
well, that's not why these were selected, because these were the purpose of the grant chargers is to give people a charging option so they will go buy EVs. So if you only put them where people already have EVs, you really wouldn't be accomplishing the purpose of the grant. Yes, we do know there are people with EVs in those neighborhoods, whether they're, right. So, yeah, so again, the whole purpose is to create a charging option so they will buy cars, not to go and meet the charging needs of people who already have cars. Presumably, they've already figured out a charging option. Now, again, it'll help them. Don't get me wrong, but again, it's more pull marketing than push marketing, if you will. So anyway, the sites were selected through the grant process. We had to propose the sites and the selection criteria to actually get the grant. So that's where the map came in. It was overlaying housing density, income levels, and looking for intersections of the conditions that the grant wanted. Proposing 5 locations in neighborhoods. And then from the neighborhood selection, we were looking for specific criteria in terms of poles where we had, well, first of all, the poles had to be on the right side. I mean, there's a whole list of things. Poles have to be on the right side of the street. It doesn't help you to have a pole mounted charger if the parking's on the other side of the street, right? I mean, there has to be the ability. Yeah, I'm saying there's a whole list of, DPW had its own list of criteria in terms of access, pull in, pull out, all of that kind of stuff. So, but the general areas were selected based on the grant criteria.
Okay. Were the NPAs also part of this discussion?
No, but the DPW has its own engagement process. So we can't grab parking places without going through the DPW engagement process. So the DPW did outreach to everybody under their outreach process, with door leaflets and all that kind of stuff. And there was feedback, and we did change one of the locations based on negative feedback. All of the remaining locations received positive feedback. And we had people who gave us feedback saying they wanted one in their neighborhood and one hadn't been proposed there. So, again, it went through the DPW feedback because it's the use of a parking place. From our point of view, it had to meet the grant criteria. So it's not open-ended. We can't just put these things anywhere. They have to, so.
I was just trying to suss that out,
Yep.
how much scrutiny that took to get to that point.
Well, through the DPW process, quite a lot. Several nighttime meetings, me there answering questions, responding by email. We had an email address set up for questions and comments. BED responded to every comment that was received through that email address individually. But it wasn't like 100 comments. It was, 6 to 10. But all people who commented received a reply, whether they were positive or negative comments.
Okay.
And it was approved unanimously at the DPW for the use of those 5 parking places for this purpose.
All right, they've talked. Other questions from other commissioners? I'm taking up the.
Over here.
Emily, the motion is on the last slide.
Yep, I think we have
We
Yeah.
already have
Oh,
it.
okay.
James.
Great.
So yeah, if there are no other questions, then there is suggested language.
Okay. I'll make the motion to authorize the general manager to seek the approval of the city council to file and implement a pilot public EV charging rate as described.
Do I have a second on the motion?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Discussion on the motion?
Okay.
Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. 4 to 0. The ayes have it. The motion passes.
Thank you all very much for your
Yeah,
consideration.
thank you, James.
you.
Appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
The last item.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, thank you. The last item on our agenda tonight is a commission's recommendation to the mayor regarding an additional term for General Manager Springer. In years past, this has generally been something that has come to us, or come to my desk as away from time that we have here, and usually would have been covered by some phone calls and whatnot, but because of the timing of the mayor's request, of it being right here while we're here, now is our time to be able to have that discussion. We'll probably come out of this discussion with a statement or something like that, and then probably final comments from commissioners and adjourn. So, because this discussion does have to do with an employee and that sort of thing, it does fall under executive session rules. Sort of the content of our discussion is protected like that. So I would take a motion to go into executive session to discuss General Manager Springer's reappointment.
I move that the commission enter into an executive session with no BED staff to discuss the reappointment of the general manager under the provisions of Title I, Section 313A3 of the Vermont statutes.
Do I have a second on the motion?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. We are in executive session. Okay, we are out of executive session. Thank you for your patience, folks. And so I'm happy to report that the commission will be recommending General Manager Springer's reappointment to the City Council and the mayor wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, that being said, we'll move on to the last item on our agenda, which is Commissioners' Check-In, which is a list of the last opportunity for commissioners to make any comments or anything on what we spoke about this evening.
No.
So did you?
No, go ahead.
I was
Okay.
gonna say, can we do street lighting at the next commissioner meeting? What the plans are for the summer?
Oh, you missed, we did it the
Oh, you
last.
did the
it the
last
last
one?
one.
No way. All right, I'll read the minutes.
We did.
Okay,
But we're happy to follow up. Paul Nadeau was here and
okay.
spoke to it.
Yeah, Paul had some.
I'd have a request is that I found the presentations really helpful, and I'd like to reference them. So if it's possible that we could get a copy of them, that would be great. And I'd also just like to thank BED staff and GM Springer and everyone for a very good presentation. Emily, it was quite thorough and very understandable for complex topics, and James on the phone. So thank you all for the hard work you put into that. It really showed, and it's made it very digestible. So thanks for that.
Well said. Thank you. Other commissioner thoughts? With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion, do we have a second? Motion and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye.